Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Jacobin Talks. I'm David Broder. I'm an editor at Jacobin magazine. And today we have a very special discussion because, of course, we're celebrating a great victory for the left, perhaps the best we'll see this year, as the movement towards socialism or mass candidate Luis Arce has won the Bolivian presidential election. So a year after the coup last November, the military coup that removed Evo Morales from power after 14 years, now his former finance minister, Luis Arce, has romped to victory with an estimated 52% of the vote. And I'm very glad to say that we have joining us today Denis Rogatyuk, who is a writer for El Ciudadano, a Chilean newspaper, and international editor at Jacobin Latin America, and author of a recent Jacobin article, The Organizers of the Bolivian Coup Will Never Accept Free Elections. And also Denis has done lots of interviews for Jacobin over the last few months with Morales, with Luis Arce, the victorious candidate, his VP pick, David Choquehuanca, and quite a few others as well. And Denis was also in Bolivia in the 3 or 4 months before the previous election in 2019. So hello, Denis.
Hello, David, and thanks for finally having me on. I've been looking forward to doing one of these talks for a while here at Jacobin.
Excellent. Well, what better occasion?
Indeed.
Indeed, we planned to have a discussion even before we knew the result last night, and perhaps we might even say that the scale of Luis Arce's success was quite surprising. Today, as you can see on your screens, he indeed won a majority of the vote. Carlos Mesa, the sort of centrist, center-right candidate, 31%, and the far-right Fernando Camacho, 14%. So today we're basically going to talk about Evo Morales' record as president, what he did to build up mass into the party it is. Then we'll talk about Luis Arce's candidacy and also, what's actually going to happen now after the election in terms of returning to power. You can please do put any questions or comments for Denis in the chat on YouTube, and the lucky winners or anyone who has a particularly interesting question, we will indeed read it out. And also, please do press the bell button to subscribe to basically follow our channel and see more of these kind of talks. It's really useful for the work we do. Okay, so Denis, let's start off by talking about Evo Morales. We ran an article the other day on Jacobin saying Evo Morales was the America's best president, not America's best, but the America's best. So, he was in power for 14 years, and indeed, even at the election last year, won 47% of the vote. What explains that strength of support, and how is it that his legacy, his government has built the base in society which has allowed it even to withstand this last year since Morales being ousted from power?
Well, I would say that the title for the greatest president that America's ever had, I think, can also be shared with other historic leaders in the region, such as Hugo Chavez or Salvador Allende or Rafael Correa. So it has but certainly one of the greatest. When we even look at the numbers of the economic achievements that Bolivia achieved under his government. So if we when we go by even the usual data, the economic data, what we see is this monumentous jump in the level of GDP in the years between 2005 and 2018, whereby it increased, whereby it had actually effectively increased by 50%. During that period of time, while the GDP growth per capita was growing at the double rate than compared to any other country in the region. And at the same time, what we also saw, this was exceptional throughout this period of time, is that even during the regional and global economic crises from the year 2008 to 2010, and then later on during the commodity crisis from 2014 to 2016, Bolivia was one of the very few countries in the region which actually continued its growth. So there was previously a lot of speculation, which was also the case for Rafael Correa in Ecuador, same case for Chavez in Venezuela, that their economic success was very much tied to the rise in commodity prices throughout this time. And Bolivia's commodity was happened to be gas and mineral exports. So yes, so the price of commodities certainly had an effect. But it was effectively this system of distribution of income, which allowed for the massive reductions in poverty, massive reductions of inequality that took place during that time. And this was itself only possible because of one of the very first measures that Evo Morales conducted in his first term as president, and that was the nationalization of Bolivia's gas and oil industry, or YPF in Spanish, which really sort of allowed the state once again to tap into this massive revenue stream and to then allow for massive increases in investment in healthcare, in education, and creation of various social programs, creation of these sort of wealth transfer programs called the bonos, which continued up until coup, and whose principal aim was the reduction in poverty. And when we look at the actual poverty numbers as well, the structural level of poverty during this time was at the beginning of Evo's first term was approximately 60%, while extreme poverty was just about 30%. And when we look at the latest available data for 2018, we saw that this number was effectively halved. Now this is not something that can be conducted just through cash splash to the population. Poverty reductions of these magnitudes can only be conducted by creating a whole new economy as well, which was very much done through, as I said, through these new massive investments and the creation of even the creation of a new kind of economic matrix, which is also where the then economic minister Luis Arce Catacora comes in, as he was one of the architects of this new system of the national popular economy.
Mm-hmm.
So on the internal market.
So Yeah, so of course a lot of the success and the sort of headline numbers for the successes under Morales' government sort of owe to this kind of industrialization, and as we see in those graphs, in fact, Bolivia, although being the one of the very poorest countries in the Americas, coming to have, for most of the years of Morales' government, like the highest growth rates, very strong poverty reduction, and this kind of thing. But it also seems that an important part of the Morales' project and of MAS is in terms of democratizing politics and particularly, of course, opening up political participation to the indigenous majority, the 30 indigenous nationalities of Bolivia who had hitherto been excluded for centuries.
Absolutely. One thing we have to remember is that before 2005 and before kind of the beginning of this process of transformation under Morales, the indigenous population of Bolivia was very much excluded from political life. They maintained a very strong role, a very strong economic role, if you can say that. So just to give a few statistics, out of the total population of Bolivia, approximately 80% identify as being either indigenous or having indigenous roots, and out of those, approximately 42 or 43%. Those who identify as being part of the Aymara, Quechua, Guarani, and other indigenous nations. But almost the vast majority of whom are situated in the west part of the country, which is called Altiplano, which is kind of the high altitude, so the mountainous part of Bolivia. And this, for most part, this although the backbone of a lot of these regions have traditionally been mining and minerals. So the role of the indigenous has kind of been traditionally in that part of the region. In that part of Bolivia, has been that of the miners and basically working the soil of Bolivia, so to speak, which we can say is both literally and metaphorically, as the indigenous were considered to be kind of the lowest of the low in the entire sort of political in the political system of the country. So in the Republic of Bolivia, so to speak, it's did not recognize the indigenous character of the country. And what we saw after the election of Evo Morales is an almost 180% turn in terms of not just of the recognition of the indigenous populations and what they meant, what their role is in society, but also in the complete change in what Bolivia actually was. So we have to remember that one of the other major reforms of Evo Morales was the constitutional referendum of 2009 to 2010, which proclaimed Bolivia as the plurinational state. So no longer recognizing one particular ethnicity or authority as a central pillar of the country, but rather the entire array of nationalities that make up Bolivia.
Okay, so of course, when the election took place last October 2019, and Morales got 47% of the vote, but nonetheless was quickly quickly subject to fraud accusations, including by the Organization of American States, and in accusations which later were strongly, indeed fundamentally discredited by researchers of the CEPR and elsewhere, some of which we've published some of their research on the Jacobin site in terms of showing that it wasn't the case that the 2019 election was fraudulent, but nonetheless, because there was something of a slip back in Morales' own support, a lot of analyses of his removal or the coup at the time, even from many left-wing sources, sought to kind of portray this picture in which the government basically over time, because of its supposed authoritarianism or because it wasn't still meeting the needs of like middle class, indigenous people and so on, was losing popular support. And yet, what's striking in the result, this morning, was that indeed Arce got over 50% of the vote. Do we think? I mean, do we think this is effectively like is this just kind of like the same voter base that voted for Morales last time, sort of coming out again and voting for Arce? Or do we think that the events of the last few months have served to kind of embolden or galvanize a kind of movement behind Mas that wasn't there before? I mean that particularly in the sense that, after the coup in 2019, the new de facto government under Janine Áñez and parts of the military and police and so on unleashed violence against social movement activists, against indigenous people, not only mass party activists as such, but the indigenous populations and the social movements of Bolivia in general. And then the last few months, thinking not only the kind of initial protests against the coup, but also the protests to demand that the elections should go ahead, particularly in August. There were strikes, road blockades, and so on, which indeed forced the government to name the date. Do you think that these events have sort of, in a sense, sort of galvanized social support for Mas, or is this really a vote for kind of Morales' record and Arce's record as finance minister?
Well, several factors, I think, were behind this unexpected increase in the level of support from us in these elections. I think number one has really been the events of the past 11 months. So I remember when I was in Bolivia, both when I was correspondent for El Ciudadano last year from July and October, and also when I was there during the 2016 referendum. The referendum on the possible re-election of Evo, which he lost by a very small margin. One of the things that always stood out in my conversations with Bolivians who voted against Evo in the referendum and also in election, one of the main arguments that they made was that there needs to be a renewal of political leaders. It's not there needs as I said, the 3 terms which Evo served was enough, and there needs to be a change of some sort. And this was coming, I say, from the traditional kind of middle class opposition, upper class opposition, from the more conservative Bolivians, all the way even to those who voted for Morales throughout this whole time since 2005. So this argument I heard repeated quite a lot of times, and unfortunately, the change, sort of, in a very strange way, in last year's elections and this year's election, the supposed change was actually represented by a man that I like to call the hangover of Bolivia's neoliberal years, and that Bolivians like to call the beggar. That's Carlos Mesa, who was the vice president of Gonzalo Sanchez de Lozada, the Bolivia's president up until Bolivia's president during the events of the
until 2001, wasn't it?
The gas wars. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And also known as also the Black October of 2003, when there was a massacre of the indigenous and workers in the city of El Alto, just outside of La Paz. And he was kind of traditionally seen as the figure that very much represents the old regime and a lot of the old practices of that era. And the reason why he got nicknamed, the beggar, was because he during a lot of his statements, he effectively tried to force Bolivia to take on more IMF debt during the crisis, political economic crisis of that time. So seeing that person become the sort of the apparent choice for a change candidate seemed like rather strange to me,
because he was the defeated candidate against Morales last time and against Arce this year.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Not to mention that he also resigned his position as president previously in 2005 because he just couldn't handle the crisis that was happening in the country. So what we actually had happen between the elections of October 2019 and now was that a section of the population, this section of voters of mass voters who might have picked Mesa last year as a way of saying there needs to be some kind of some sort of change, have now realized what that change looks like. Of these 11 months of the neoliberal administration of Áñez, and change looks like looks like another massacre in El Alto, another massacre in Cochabamba. It is the attempted privatization of some of the country's key industries as they have already attempted to begin privatizing the Bolivia's state communications agency and Entel. They've already started to attempts at privatizing the gas and oil industry, YPFB. They have, they've promised implementing tax cuts for the rich, and at the same time, they've abandoned a lot of the social projects, the investment projects which Evo Morales and his government were implementing before, especially this with regards to the industrialization program of lithium in the region of in the Yasuni region of Potosí. So people, the people that we would call in America, in the United States, they would call swing voters, kind of realized and understood what another 5 years of neoliberalism will look like, and they decided to go for the safe option of Mas. And I guess in this case, it was actually quite a genius move on the part of Mas and on the part of Evo Morales to actually select Arce Catacora as the main presidential candidate. He was, I think, as I mentioned, he was kind of the architect of Bolivia's economic miracle during those years. He was the country's Minister of Finance and the Economy effectively from 2006 until 2019, with the exception of one period, I think, of 10 months when he had to step back from his position. But he was seen as this figure in Mas associated with the economic success of those years.
So, I mean, there's a certain well, one thing I think we should say is as you mentioned, the massacres that took place since the coup in 2019, because I think like today today like some of the basically today some of the kind of liberal commentators who justified and defended the coup last year, but who now find themselves, and basically said Morales had lost popular support, and that the transitional government, so-called of Janine Áñez, was like somehow like saving democracy and democratic institutions and so on. There's a certain attempt to kind of say like, well, in fact, what happened last year wasn't a military coup, and that free and fair elections did take place. But of course, that story sort of misses out all of the part in between, including the murderous attacks. And we might remember the spectacle of a mass mayor, Patricia Arce, being dragged through the streets, beaten, her hair cut off, covered in red paint, and as you see there, she was elected as senator yesterday. But of course, some of the mass candidates, including Morales himself, were and Rodriguez, the coca growers leader, were banned from standing from the Senate. And also, of course, there's dozens of people killed. And as you say, the so-called transitional government actually started rolling back the social program of the mass government. But I suppose what I wonder there is, if after the exit, or after the sort of quick count results were announced, Jenny Áñez was quite quick to admit that or acknowledge that Arce had won, and that Mas will be coming back to power. So I guess the two connected questions there are, firstly, how certain can we be that this election result will indeed translate into Mas returning to government, and that there isn't going to be further interference, that that the actual result will be fulfilled? And secondly, does that imply something different about the kind of government that Arce is going to lead, now that we know that as we saw with the coup last year, that there are sort of elements within the state, within the military, and so on, which are not necessarily loyal to a democratically elected government?
Right. Well, I think that we have to keep in mind that one of the main culprits of last year's coup, that's Luis Almagro, the General Secretary of the Organization of the American States, also acknowledged the victory of Luis Arce Catacora and David Choquehuanca in a tweet, in a message on Twitter, which I consider to be both bizarre and condescending, because the OAS was kind of play a central role in falsifying the reports and saying that Evo Morales conducted a mega fraud during last year's elections. So when you have a figure like that, so a figure which for the last 5 years or so has basically effectively positioned himself on the side of implementing United States' foreign policy across the region. When you have a person when you have a figure like that acknowledging the victory of a socialist candidate, well, not just a socialist candidate, but a socialist candidate of a party which he helped to overthrow, that you understand sort of the magnitude of the situation. It is completely undeniable, and this I believe also speaks volumes of what the real result is also likely to look like. As we've seen that most of the exit polls have pointed out to Luis Arce winning with between 52 and 53%, but I believe that the real result could actually be much higher. could actually be closer to 60%. And this can be backed by a few factors of what actually took place on polling day. Just hours prior to polling day, the start of the voting process, the Bolivia's Supreme Electoral Tribunal scrapped this this sort of quick count system of showing preliminary results, which they implemented with the help of United Nations, called DRP. And this system itself actually replaced the system which was used in last year's elections, called TREP. Yes, and this was considered to be a rather bizarre move, but then it was explained why that took place, and that's because this new system was far less transparent, and once the results were released, it would be impossible to actually verify the authenticity of this preliminary result. But that does mean that the TSE didn't already know the real results during that night, during night of the elections, which leads me to my second point: is that during the night, traditionally, the Bolivian television networks release exit polls around about 8 or 9 p.m., depending on what kind of election it is. And this is something that did not take place in this election. So they waited until midnight to release these results. So I believe those the difference of 4 hours was very much was attributed to the Agnes government actually scrambling to see how they can try to somehow spin this around, because how would they be able to explain such a massive vote for mass? That's mostly like the body of the situation. That's mostly the body of the election on that day. But the second part of your question was with regards to.
Well, will the government be able to sort of take office in a peaceful way? But I guess also, I mean, like, kind of, it's even through Morales's first term in office, there was strong destabilization. If we think in 2008, there was the uprising in the Media Luna, like the eastern provinces. And of course, a lot of the forces involved in that, if we think of like the armed paramilitary and sort of religious fundamentalist, like Christian fundamentalist, white separatist movements in Santa Cruz, are exactly the kind of forces that surged to prominence during the coup again last year. And Fernando Camacho, who came third in the election on 14%. He exactly and totally represents that kind of fascist and separatist cause. So, I mean, do you think that the scale of Mas's victory means that those kind of forces will somehow be kind of pacified, or do you think that we could have something a bit like what's basically been the sort of dominant trend in Venezuelan politics the last few years, where you just have like a permanent and implacable opposition between two sides, neither of who can, in which the opposition basically doesn't recognize the legitimacy of the government whatsoever?
No, let's break this down into 4 parts and dedicating to the different reactionary element, or at least reactionary elements that could cause trouble for the future government. So the army, the police, the paramilitaries, and the separatist movement. Now, with regards to the army, it's important to note that during last year's coup, it was not necessarily. It wasn't really the army which led the charge against Morales. Was the army and the military actually eventually came late to forcing forcing out. So their intervention was crucial, was key to ensure to overthrowing Evo Morales, but they were not necessarily the initiators of it. There has been an attempt in Bolivia in the last 5 years or so of introducing a new kind of political training, to sort of to try to counter the influence of the School of the Americas military academy, where the majority of Bolivia's officers and generals graduated from. So it was the foundation of the anti-imperialist school in 2015 by one of the other key figures in Bolivia's in Evo's government. That was Juan Ramon Quintana, and the purpose was basically to create a new cadre of officers in the Bolivian military. The exact extent to which this was successful is very hard to tell, considering the events of the last 11 months. There was, and also following the coup, it was very much kind of the top brass of Bolivia's military, which fell in line with Agni's government, and that was responsible for the massacres in Cochabamba and in El Alto. But at the same time, we also understood that far from all of Bolivia's coup, far from all of Bolivia's military was actually supportive of the coup or on the side of the coup. In fact, there was always kind of uncertainty from the Agni's government as to just how loyal and how much should they rely on the army to carry out the most violent actions against the protests, against the trade unionists, against the supporters of Mas, which is where the police came in. Now, the police kind of played a crucial part during the coup of November 2019, as the police mutiny, so to speak, is the one that really reinforced the opposition protests that were already taking place throughout Bolivia during that time. And Bolivia's police has traditionally been a corrupt and inefficient institution. Now, during Evo Morales' time in government, one of the key reforms that he implemented is that he actually he took away the powers of the police. Because in Bolivia, the agency which kind of makes IDs, identification, and of that sort was actually controlled by the police before Evo's government. Now, Evo's government removed that responsibility from the police and gave it to other bodies in the government, which was actually a huge blow to the police, because one of the most profitable corruption schemes that the police used to run was selling fake identification. So they were not happy with Evo Morales throughout his government. But more so, there were during the events of the coup, the information eventually emerged that large sections of the police, and particularly the police chiefs, were bought off by figures like Luis Fernando Camacho from Santa Cruz, who himself is part of the land owning elite of that region, and which explains kind of the reason why the police began supporting the coup against Evo. Which brings me to the issue of the paramilitaries and of armed, ultra conservative groups such as Unión Juvenil Crucenista in Santa Cruz, of Resistencia Juvenil Cochala and Cochabamba, and La Resistencia in La Paz, kind of the three main groups in these regions, which have been serving, which effectively have been serving as the one of the main forces of repression by the Yañez government. Now, paramilitarism is nothing new to Bolivia's politics, as the landowning elites of Santa Cruz have traditionally actually had their own private armies for a very long time. But what really kind of became new in this context was the way in which how openly these new groups began cooperating with the police and with the Bolivian government in the last 11 months. And during the mass protests of August, when trade union organizations throughout the country, when women's organizations, the peasants collectives began blockading the roads and the country, neither the police nor the army actually intervened during this time. So the main force to actually try to disperse the protests were paramilitaries, especially in Cochabamba. And I think this actually helps to explain a few things. As that first of all, the Yañez government, up to that point, has effectively lost the unconditional support of both the police and the army. But the main factor behind that isn't that that the police and the army suddenly had a change of heart and suddenly started to appreciate Evo Morales or wanting for another socialist government in the country. No, rather the reason is quite simple. The reason is economics. As under the Yañez governments, the economy of Bolivia has just basically began a process of disintegration. It's because of the level of mismanagement which they conducted. As I mentioned before, the privatizations they attempted, all of the social investments which they stopped, all this had a massive detrimental effect on Bolivia's economy and on the income of the population, including the police and the military. There have been reports that sections of the military, especially the soldiers and the low-ranking officers, haven't actually been receiving their wage in the last 3 months, or at least not receiving their whole wage. While on the other hand side, the police were promised large, wage increases by the Yañez government after the coup, which never came about. So the police itself became quite agitated and angry with the Yañez government. Which kind of finally brings me to the fourth element in this formula, and which I personally think could actually be the main problem, the main issue for the next 5 years or so of ARSA government, and that is the separatist movement in Santa Cruz. One of the I already mentioned Luis Fernando Camacho and the role he played in the coup of November last year. Now, as a candidate, Fernando Camacho only scored approximately 15% of the vote, according to the exit poll. Now, compared to Luis Arce scored 52%, that may seem quite minuscule, but not when we look at where that vote is concentrated. That vote is concentrated almost entirely in the province of Santa Cruz, which is quite worrying. But also not really unexpected, as this is the main province which was kind of been the hotbed of the country's right wing and conservative forces, and also of this movement which existed for quite a long time. This sort of Europeanisque mentality that the people of Santa Cruz are somehow above those of Altiplano. As ironic as that sounds, because Altiplano is much higher, far more above
Close to the sea.
But if we are to try to kind of explain the mentality to explain the separatist mentality and the way that they see the rest of the indigenous population, I think the best example to use would actually be apartheid South Africa. So we basically have this white economic elite which controls the vast majority of the lands in the region, which controls the vast majority of the economic resources in the region, and which very much sees itself as being ethnically and morally superior to the country's indigenous population, and would do whatever it takes to to maintain their privileges in the country. And this is also a movement which has counted with the support and with leadership of some rather bizarre figures as well. One of them being Branko Marinkovic, who is currently the Minister of the Economy under Agnes, although I imagine he's packing his bags as we speak. It's that he played a crucial role in actually leading the 2008 separatist uprising against Evo Morales, but then was forced into exile in Brazil after that failed. And he and some of the other figures, such as now the ex-minister of government of the Agnes regime, Arturo Murillo, as well as the Bolivia's foreign minister, Karen Longaric, they all hail from the Croatian families, so to speak, or the Croatian, and who themselves were for most part were exiled from Croatia following World War II. So a lot of these families actually have ties to the old Ustaša movement in Croatia, the Nazi collaborators. So effectively think about Nazis immigrating into Brazil and Argentina, and then taking control of government there. This is the kind of mentality as well that we're dealing with here. And they would, I believe, they would constitute the greatest threat to Bolivia for the next 5 years. As Santa Cruz is just one province, but in terms of resources, in terms of agricultural resources, in terms of mineral wealth, it is one of the most important provinces in the region. So there are a lot of ways in which the far right over there could actually attempt to sabotage both Bolivia's economy and Bolivia's government, through either stopping the export of food and agricultural products to the rest of the country, which they also attempted to do in 2009, 2010. They would try to, there could be another attempt to separate the country, and they could even try to actually create their own armed forces if Bolivia's armed forces are purged of the pro-coup elements and once again become loyal to the presidency. So I wouldn't say that we're going to come, that this would look like the situation we've seen in Venezuela since 2017. It's kind of hard to find an example to compare this to, but I do believe that we're going to find Bolivia very much polarized now between these two different sides. So the indigenous majority in the east, which wants a plurinational state, which wants a popular solidarity economy, and on the other hand side, the separatist conservative side, which has always been hostile to the indigenous, has always been hostile to any measure of the redistribution of wealth there. And next 5 years are going to be defined by the battle between these two main blocks.
Right, so we don't have a whole deal more time, but I would like to bring in a couple of the questions brought up by our viewers on YouTube. So first is this from Lurtis. Will Morales now be returning from exile? And if so, how will he integrate, how will he be involved in the new political landscape?
Well, during my interview with Evo Morales, I asked him the same question. He said he definitely had plans to return to Bolivia, but he didn't state but he never stated whether he actually wants to become, officially part of Luis Alfred's government, or at least holding a ministerial posts of any kind. One thing we really have to remember is that regardless of whether Evo Morales has any official government post, the majority of his influence and of his power comes on the back of his legacy throughout the country. So this is a man, kind of in a similar way to Rafael Correa in Ecuador, who would have millions of supporters, regardless of what position he has, because of this recognition of the massive advance that he has done in the country. I would say my guess would be that Evo Morales is not going to hold any ministerial positions. My best guess would be that we will actually, I think, see Evo Morales returning to his roots in Cochabamba, as he was the leader of the coca growers trade union.
He still is, isn't he?
Sorry?
Isn't he still kind of formally the president of the union?
He well, there are several there are several kind of coca growers unions across Bolivia. The one that he was part of, I think, were called the Six Federations of the Tropics of Cochabamba. They are now led by Andrónico Rodriguez, who has just been elected as a senator from us. Who's considered to be like a young political leader, and also a trade unionist. And he was actually was hailed. I remember during last year's elections, when his figure kind of first emerged, he was kind of hailed as as kind of the heir of Evo Morales, because he kind of hails from very similar origins as him. So I think we're going to see Evo Morales being among his olds, spending a lot more time among his old comrades when he does.
Sure. Okay. And so we've got another question from Charlie. Several people brought this up. Seeing a lot of jokes online about Elon Musk wanting Bolivia's lithium. How real is this? And was lithium a significant factor in the US supporting the coup?
Well, it was one of the central factors in the US supporting the coup. Bolivia has, I believe, the largest lithium reserves in the world. And just prior to the coup, Bolivia made several reforms, several decisions in the industrialization process. So they signed several deals with a German conglomerate to begin the mining and the enrichment of lithium on one hand side, but on the other side, they also began the program of making products out of lithium, and that's particularly with regards to electric cars. I remember it was in the month prior to last year's elections. There was one of the big announcements was the first shipment of electric cars that were made in Bolivia, made with Bolivia's lithium, and Evo Morales driving one of them. So that was quite fascinating. Now, can we say that Elon Musk was behind the coup? That did he finance the coup, and was he the one giving orders to the coup leaders? Probably not. But he is certainly the one who profited immensely from from having a friendly neoliberal government in charge. I I would say it was very much the U.S. government which was far more interested in securing Bolivia's natural resources for the multinational companies that are based over there.
Mm-hmm. So maybe he wanted to boast of his involvement, as he did on Twitter, but wasn't the driving force.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the tweet that he said, we will coup whoever we want, deal with it. At first I thought that was a tweet by Mike Pompeo, but then I realized, before realizing, no, that's actually Elon Musk, because that sentence, those two phrases together are basically a summary of the U.S. foreign policy for the last decades, last several decades in Latin America, for the last century in Latin America.
So actually, I'll squeeze in one last question of my own, kind of on that point. Of course, the reason we talk about Bolivia is because of the successes of Morales' presidency, but at the same time, in terms of like population or the size of its economy or such like, it's quite a small country, but nonetheless, it stands as an important example across Latin America, an inspiration, a beacon, we could say, firstly because of its support for progressive governments and movements elsewhere. So I mean, looking at kind of other elections, other struggles going on in South America, like if we think about the resistance against Bolsonaro in Brazil, or perhaps the coming elections in Ecuador, do you think that this result, and particularly the fact that it's come after the coup, after the repression, do you think that this is a kind of inspiration for those kind of movements? And basically, can we expect this to sort of push the pink tide forward again?
I think one very important thing to note is that this is actually the first time in the history, or in the modern history of Latin America, that a left-wing government came back to power straight away after the coup. This has never happened in the last 2 decades of the pink tide governments. Previously, it was always the case that at some point there is a coup, either by the military or the police or the parliament supported by economic elites. What happens is that then the progressive leader of that country is either exiled or is forced into is arrested or whatever. And then there is an election, and the right wing comes to power and then initiates several years of neoliberal hell. This is not something that happened in the case of Bolivia. Rather it was a case of military coup, massacre, neoliberal hell, and people quickly realizing and understanding what the following few years are going to look like, and then choosing and once again choosing socialism over barbarism. So Bolivia's election really broke this record, this kind of this vicious cycle of coups, neoliberal governments, progressive governments being overthrown once again, and followed by right-wing governments. So this seems to have stopped with the election in Bolivia. And I would say that this is going to have a tremendous effect on the elections in Ecuador, because on the same day that Luis Arce won in Bolivia, on the very same day, the presidential duo representing the Citizens' Revolution in Ecuador, that's Andrés Arauz and Carlos Rabascal, were confirmed definitively by Ecuador's by Ecuador's sorry, I'm doing Spanish translation in my head. The Electoral Council, Ecuador's Electoral Council, as the candidates. There have been numerous legal attempts, first stopping Rafael Correa from being the candidate, then trying to eliminate Correa's party, then stopping Andres Arau's candidacy or the candidacy of his vice president, and there was another attempt in the last several weeks to impede them from participating. All of these have failed. So, and I believe that in Ecuador we're going to see a very similar result to what we've seen in Bolivia, because the Ecuadorians have already suffered almost 4 years of a neoliberal government, and really understanding understanding that this is not something which they wish to see prolonged for another 4 years by a candidate that's like Guillermo Lasso, who is the main right-wing opposition candidate, and one of the main sort of arch enemies of Rafael Correa.
Okay, well, fantastic. So we can hopefully look forward to that. For everyone watching, thanks for joining us. You should definitely check out Denis's vast amount of writing and interviews for Jacobin. He interviewed almost all of the leaders of MAS and the outgoing government over the last few months. Also, please do click like and subscribe to these Jacobin talks on YouTube as well. We have 2 scheduled for the rest of this week already. So the first is on Wednesday with Chris Maizano on our political revolution and changing the political structures of the United States, hopefully. And then, so that's on Wednesday at 6 EST. And then on Friday at 6 EST, we have Lee Phillips on fighting anti-vaxxer nonsense. So please do also join us for those. Thanks everyone for watching, and have a good evening, and have a glass of champagne to celebrate Luis Arce's victory, or whatever alcohol you prefer.
So, Hayaya Bolivia, as they say.
Thank you.